I can't marry her." The words landed like shattered glass. Emma Collins stared at the man she'd loved for 5 years, her lips parted in silent disbelief. The vows she'd rehearsed 100 times vanished from her mind, as Daniel Pierce looked at the guests instead of her, wearing a smile that made the betrayal even crueler. Then he lifted one hand and pointed toward a slim brunette seated in the front row. "She's the woman I should have chosen." A sharp gasp rippled through the chapel. Phones quietly rose into the air. Someone whispered Emma's name with pity. Someone else pressed record. Emma couldn't move. She couldn't even breathe. Then measured footsteps echoed through the stunned silence. A tall man walked straight to the altar. No one dared stop him. He slipped off his suit jacket, draped it gently over Emma's trembling shoulders, and faced Daniel with calm, unreadable eyes. "You just gave away the greatest woman in this room." His gaze never wavered. "From this moment on, she belongs beside me." Only then did the guests recognize the man who had spoken, and every whisper in the chapel died at once. For several endless seconds, no one spoke. The soft music that had been playing moments earlier seemed almost cruel now, continuing for a few lingering notes before someone hurriedly switched it off. The silence that followed felt heavier than any scream. Emma remained frozen beneath the white floral arch she had designed herself. Every ribbon, every candle, every bouquet. She had chosen each detail with loving precision, believing this would be the beginning of her forever. Now every decoration stood as a witness to her humiliation. Daniel let out a short laugh, shaking his head as though the stranger beside Emma had delivered the greatest joke of the afternoon. "Who are you supposed to be?" he asked, folding his arms. "Some kind of hero?" A few nervous chuckles rose from the back of the room. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he reached for Emma with remarkable care, not touching her directly, not pulling her, simply adjusting the suit jacket around her shoulders after noticing how violently she was trembling. The gesture was so gentle that Emma finally blinked. She looked up for the first time. He was taller than she had realized. Dark hair, calm gray eyes, an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. There wasn't the slightest hint of anger on his face, only quiet certainty. Daniel smirked. "If this is some publicity stunt, you're interrupting my wedding." The man's gaze shifted toward him. "No," he replied evenly. "You ended your wedding." Daniel rolled his eyes dramatically. "Listen, buddy. Whatever this is, you can leave now. This doesn't concern you." Before the stranger could respond, movement spread through the guests. A distinguished older gentleman in the second row suddenly stood. His wife followed. Then another businessman. Another. Within moments, nearly every influential guest in attendance had risen to their feet. Not because Daniel had spoken, because of the man standing beside Emma. One by one, they nodded respectfully. Several lowered their heads ever so slightly. Others greeted him quietly. "Mr. Moretti." "It's an honor." "Good afternoon, sir." Daniel's confident smile disappeared. "What?" He turned in confusion toward the guests he had spent months trying to impress. Instead of looking at him, they were looking past him, toward the stranger. Emma noticed it too. Confusion slowly replaced the shock in her eyes. Who was this man? Why did everyone suddenly seem afraid to breathe? Near the aisle, one guest discreetly lowered the phone that had been recording the disaster. Another whispered urgently to his wife. "I didn't know Luca Moretti was coming. He wasn't on the guest list. He never attends private weddings." The whispers spread like ripples across still water. Emma heard the name. It meant nothing to her. Daniel, however, turned pale. He had heard it before. Everyone in Chicago's business circles had. Luca Moretti, chairman of the Moretti Group, a billionaire whose investments shaped skylines, hospitals, and charities across the city. A man whose approval opened doors, whose disapproval quietly closed them forever. Daniel swallowed hard. "You," his voice cracked. "You're Luca Moretti." Luca offered neither confirmation nor denial. He simply looked at Emma. "Can you walk?" The question was soft, asked only for her. Emma stared blankly for a heartbeat, before giving the smallest nod. I think so." "Good." He offered his arm, not his hand, giving her the choice instead of making it for her. For several seconds she hesitated. Everything inside her still screamed that this couldn't be real. Only minutes ago, she had been a bride. Now she couldn't even remember how to stand. Finally, with trembling fingers, she rested her hand lightly against his arm. Luca waited until she had found her balance. Only then did they begin walking. Neither of them hurried. Neither of them looked back. The guests instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path down the aisle. No one wanted to be the person blocking Luca Moretti. Emma kept her eyes lowered. She couldn't bear the pity, the whispers, the cameras. She expected laughter. Instead, all she heard was silence. A silence filled with something entirely different. Respect. Behind them, Daniel suddenly found his voice again. "Emma!" She stopped instinctively. Luca did not. He merely slowed enough for her to decide. Daniel forced an awkward laugh. "You don't seriously know this guy?" Emma didn't answer. Daniel took one desperate step forward. "This is ridiculous. He's just trying to embarrass me." For the first time since entering the chapel, Luca looked back. His expression remained composed. "If humiliating you had been my goal," he said quietly, "I would have arrived 5 minutes earlier." The words struck harder than any shout. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Luca turned away again. Together, he and Emma walked through the chapel doors into the bright afternoon sunlight. As the heavy wooden doors closed behind them, the murmurs inside erupted into complete chaos. Emma didn't hear any of it. For the first time since Daniel had said, "I can't marry her," she no longer had to face the room alone. The afternoon air felt strangely quiet after the storm inside the chapel. Emma stood on the broad stone steps outside the church, clutching the suit jacket around herself, as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Wensos. Guests filtered out behind them in cautious clusters, pretending not to stare while failing completely. She could still feel hundreds of eyes following her, though no one dared approach. A sleek black sedan rolled silently to the curb. The driver stepped out immediately and opened the rear door. "Mr. Moretti." Luca gave a slight nod before looking at Emma. "Let's leave." She blinked, finally finding enough strength to speak. I can't." His expression remained patient. "You can. My car is still here. We'll have someone bring it. My dress." She glanced down at the gown she had once imagined wearing in family photographs. The delicate lace was stained where tears had fallen. One sleeve had slipped slightly from her shoulder. For the first time all day, she became painfully aware that she was standing in public, dressed as a bride, who no longer had a wedding. "I must look ridiculous," she whispered. Luca answered without hesitation. "No, nothing more. No elaborate compliment. No attempt to convince her she looked beautiful. Just one calm word spoken with complete certainty. For reasons she couldn't explain, it steadied her more than any speech could have. She reluctantly slid into the back seat. Luca followed, closing the door behind them. As the car eased away from the church, Emma instinctively looked out the window instead of at him. The chapel slowly disappeared behind rows of trees, taking with it the future she had imagined for 5 years. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't awkward. It was merciful. Eventually Emma inhaled slowly. "I'm sorry." Luca turned toward her. "For what? You got dragged into whatever that was. You have nothing to apologize for." I don't even know why you were there. I know. She frowned. Then, why were you? His answer came almost casually. I came because I heard there was a wedding. She looked at him in confusion. You attend random weddings? No. So? I attended yours. That only made her more puzzled. Why mine? Luca studied the passing city outside before answering. Because I knew the bride. Emma almost laughed despite herself. You definitely didn't. I did. She shook her head. I'm sorry, but I'd remember meeting someone like you. I never introduced myself. That sentence lingered between them. Emma searched his face, hoping memory would suddenly appear. Nothing. I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else. I haven't. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone stating a fact rather than winning an argument. Nearly 11 months ago, he continued, the Moretti Foundation hosted a children's cancer charity gala at the Lakeshore Museum. Emma's eyes widened. I planned that event. I know. It had almost 600 guests. I remember. She frowned, trying desperately to recall him among hundreds of faces. I still don't remember seeing you. You didn't. I don't understand. I watched from the balcony for most of the evening. She stared. Why? I prefer observing people before introducing myself. Emma gave him an uncertain smile. That's slightly intimidating. It can be. The faintest trace of amusement appeared in his eyes. She had expected him to be stern. Instead, she was discovering someone unexpectedly dry in his humor. You watched me? For several hours. Her cheeks warmed. That sounds much worse when you say it out loud. I noticed something. What? You thanked every waiter by name. Emma blinked. What? You thanked the cleaners after the event. She searched her memory. I always do. I know. You noticed that. I noticed everything. She looked down, embarrassed. It isn't special. It is. She shrugged softly. They worked just as hard as everyone else. Most people thanked the donors. You thanked the staff. The car grew quiet again. Emma had organized hundreds of weddings and charity events. She had spent years making sure flowers arrived on time, musicians had water, photographers had meals, and exhausted servers got breaks. She had never imagined anyone important was paying attention. Luca continued. There was another gala 4 months later. The literacy fundraiser. You were there too. I was. Emma's forehead creased. And another. The children's hospital auction. She slowly counted the events in her head. You've been watching me for almost a year. I've been observing someone who never changed. She laughed nervously. I don't know whether to be flattered or concerned. You may choose whichever makes you more comfortable. Despite everything that had happened only an hour earlier, a tiny laugh escaped her. It surprised both of them. Luca noticed first. There it is. She looked at him. What? The laugh your staff always had. My staff. They enjoyed working with you. You talked to them. Sometimes. Emma stared in disbelief. You knew my employees. They spoke highly of their boss. She covered her face with one hand. This is impossible. It happened. No. What's impossible is that I somehow never noticed the most recognizable businessman in Chicago. You were busy making everyone else's evening successful. She lowered her hand. And you remembered me? I never forgot you. The words were spoken so quietly that they almost disappeared beneath the hum of the engine. Emma turned toward the window again before he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. Not because she believed she deserved to cry, but because, for the first time in years, someone had remembered her for the way she treated people. Not for the number on a scale, not for how she looked in a wedding dress, just for her kindness. The realization hurt almost as much as the heartbreak. The sedan came to a gentle stop in front of Emma's apartment building, just as the late afternoon sun began to sink behind Chicago's skyline. The driver stepped out immediately. "I'll bring your things inside, Miss Collins." Emma quickly shook her head. "Oh no, you don't have to. It's already been arranged," Luca said quietly. She sighed, giving up before the sentence was finished. "I'm beginning to notice something." "What?" "You don't really ask people." A hint of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I do." "No." She folded her arms, pretending to sound offended. "You present decisions very politely." For the first time that day, Luca's smile became unmistakable. "It saves time. It also makes arguing impossible. I've noticed." She let out another small laugh. The sound surprised her again. How could she laugh on the worst day of her life? The thought alone almost made the smile disappear. Luca noticed the change immediately. "Emma." She looked away. "I'm fine." "No. I'm trying to be." He didn't challenge her. Instead, he followed her into the lobby, keeping a respectful distance that never felt cold. The elevator climbed slowly toward the 6th floor. Its mirrored walls reflected a woman Emma barely recognized. Mascara streaked beneath swollen eyes, loose strands of hair escaping the elegant bridal hairstyle she had admired only hours earlier. A wedding gown that no longer belonged to a bride. She stared at herself for several silent seconds, then whispered, almost absent-mindedly, "I knew this dress wouldn't look good on me." Luca turned. "What?" She shrugged, as though she had merely commented on the weather. "I told the seamstress to make another fitting. Daniel said if I lost another 15 pounds, I'd finally look like a real bride." Silence settled inside the elevator. Not an uncomfortable silence, a dangerous one. Emma continued, before realizing she had begun saying things she had hidden for years. "He hated it whenever I ordered dessert." Her voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. He'd laugh and say, she swallowed, "Do you really need that?" The words echoed in the confined space. She forced a weak smile. "I stopped ordering dessert after that." The elevator doors opened. Neither of them moved immediately. Luca finally spoke. "How long?" She understood the question. "A little over 3 years." 3 years. She nodded. It started with little comments. She unlocked her apartment door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as she had left it that morning. A vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen island. Wedding invitations framed on a shelf. A pair of honeymoon travel guides stacked neatly beside the sofa. Evidence everywhere of a future that no longer existed. She slipped off her heels and finally allowed herself to breathe. It never sounded cruel at first, she admitted. Maybe this dress would fit better if... Maybe we should try eating healthier together. Maybe the wedding photos will be more flattering if... She smiled bitterly. Maybe. That word became everything. Luca quietly removed his jacket from her shoulders and draped it over the back of a chair. He still didn't interrupt. He started sending me pictures. Pictures. Bridal magazines. She laughed softly without humor. "Look how elegant she looks. This style would suit you if..." Another pause. "If you were smaller." The room felt painfully still. Emma walked toward the kitchen and absent-mindedly filled a kettle with water. The familiar routine gave her trembling hands something to do. I joined 3 gyms. I hired a nutrition coach. I tried every diet anyone recommended. She stared at the kettle. I always gained the weight back. Then I'd apologize. Luca frowned. "You apologized?" I thought I was disappointing him. She finally looked at him. I really believed that. There was no self-pity in her voice, only heartbreaking honesty. I thought love meant trying harder. Luca remained silent long enough for her to continue naturally. "You know what's strange?" She smiled faintly. "I wasn't even surprised today." His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What do you mean?" When he said he couldn't marry me. She lowered her gaze. A part of me thought, of course, this was always going to happen. The confession hung heavily between them. I spent years planning perfect weddings for other women. She ran her fingers lightly across the edge of the kitchen counter. Beautiful women. Tiny waists. Perfect photographs. They'd cry because they were happy. I'd help fix their veil. Then go home wondering what it felt like to be chosen without conditions. Luca watched her carefully. For the first time, he understood something important. Emma wasn't mourning the loss of Daniel. That grief had ended long before today. What shattered her at the altar wasn't losing the man she loved. It was hearing every private insecurity spoken aloud before hundreds of witnesses. Daniel hadn't created her self-doubt. He had simply confirmed the lies she had been telling herself for years. "You know what hurts the most?" she asked quietly. Luca waited. He pointed at another woman. She swallowed hard, and nobody looked surprised. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks, as if everyone had always expected he'd eventually find someone prettier. Luca crossed the room slowly, not close enough to invade her space, only close enough that she wouldn't feel alone. They were wrong. Emma shook her head immediately. "You don't have to say that. I wasn't. You don't even know me. I know enough." She laughed through her tears. "You've watched me at charity events. I've watched who you become when nobody important is watching." She stared at him. "That's who you really are." The kettle began to whistle softly behind her. Neither of them moved. Emma wiped her face with trembling fingers. "I keep thinking, if I'd lost those 15 pounds, maybe today would have been different." Luca's answer came without the slightest hesitation. "No." She looked up. "Daniel didn't leave because of your body. He left because of his character." The room fell completely silent. No one had ever separated those two things for her before. For years, she had believed the problem lived in the mirror. For the first time, someone suggested it had never been there at all. She didn't know whether she believed him yet, but she desperately wanted to. 3 weeks passed. Chicago moved on. The internet did not. The video from the wedding spread far beyond the guests who had witnessed it. Clips appeared on social media with dramatic captions. Some viewers condemned Daniel's cruelty. Others praised the mysterious billionaire who had stepped forward without raising his voice. Emma refused to watch any of them. She buried herself in work instead. Ironically, wedding season had reached its busiest months. Every morning, she met hopeful couples choosing flowers, tasting cakes, and debating seating charts. Every afternoon, she smiled through consultations, never allowing clients to see how much standing near an altar still unsettled her. Some nights were easier than others. Some nights, she still heard Daniel's voice. "I can't marry her." Whenever those words returned, another memory quietly followed. A warm suit jacket settling across her shoulders. Those two moments had become impossible to separate. Luca never overwhelmed her with attention. He simply appeared when life naturally crossed their paths. Sometimes he invited her to lunch after a charity planning meeting. Sometimes he sent a short message asking whether she had eaten. Sometimes fresh coffee arrived at her office with no note except, "Long day." He never demanded a reply. He never expected anything. The absence of pressure slowly became its own kind of comfort. Emma found herself looking forward to seeing him without admitting it aloud. One afternoon, while reviewing decorations for another Moretti Foundation fundraiser, she met Sophia Moretti again. Elegant as always, Luca's mother greeted her with a warm embrace. "My dear," Emma smiled shyly. "It's good to see you again." Sophia studied her face for a moment. "You look lighter." Emma laughed softly. "I still cry more than I'd like." "That isn't what I meant." Sophia gently squeezed her hand. "You've started looking people in the eyes again. Emma hadn't realized she had stopped. Before she could answer, Sophia smiled knowingly. "My son worries about you." Emma's cheeks warmed. "He doesn't show it much. He never does." Sophia chuckled. "When Luca was 12, he rescued an injured bird." Emma listened curiously. "He claimed he wasn't attached. What happened?" "He built it a tiny shelter." Emma smiled. "He fed it every morning before school. And, when it finally flew away," Sophia's eyes sparkled with amusement, "he cancelled 3 meetings that day." Emma couldn't help laughing. "So he's always been like this?" "He protects quietly." Sophia leaned closer. "The mistake people make is believing silence means indifference." Those words stayed with Emma long after the conversation ended. 2 nights later, the annual Moretti Foundation charity banquet filled one of Chicago's grandest ballrooms. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors. Business leaders, philanthropists, artists, community volunteers, nearly everyone important in the city attended. Emma had coordinated the event for months. As guests arrived, she moved confidently through the ballroom, greeting florists, photographers, musicians, and servers by name. Luca noticed, just as he always had. Across the room, Daniel Pierce noticed something else. He had spent the last 3 weeks learning everything he could about Luca Moretti. Every article, every interview, every business acquisition, every whispered rumor. Only then had he understood the scale of the mistake he had made. Emma wasn't simply spending time with a wealthy businessman. She had earned the trust of one of the most influential men in Chicago. And Daniel suddenly wanted another chance. Not because he missed her laughter, not because he regretted humiliating her, but because he now understood what standing beside Luca Moretti could mean. His own ambitions had blinded him once. This time they drove him back. As dinner concluded and the evening's charitable pledges were announced, Daniel stepped onto the small presentation stage before anyone could stop him. Conversations faded. Emma looked up in surprise. "What is he doing?" one guest whispered. Daniel accepted the microphone with a practiced smile. "I know this isn't part of tonight's program." Several uneasy glances spread across the ballroom. He continued anyway. "I owe someone an apology." Emma's heartbeat slowed, then quickened again. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Daniel climbed down from the stage and walked across the ballroom until he stood only a few feet away. He lowered his head dramatically. "Emma, I'm sorry." The room remained perfectly still. "I was confused. I let pressure influence my decision. I hurt the woman who stood by me for 5 years." He looked up, making sure everyone could see the regret on his face. "I've realized the greatest mistake of my life." Emma listened without expression, not because she was cold, because something felt wrong. The words sounded polished, rehearsed, as though they had been written for an audience rather than for her. Daniel took another careful step closer. "If you'll give me another chance, I'll spend the rest of my life making this right." Silence spread through the ballroom. Guests exchanged uncertain glances. Some watched Emma, others watched Luca, who remained standing near the edge of the room, saying nothing. He did not interrupt. He did not influence her. The decision belonged entirely to Emma. She looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then she remembered every meal she had skipped, every dress she had apologized for not fitting, every tear she had cried in secret while believing she simply wasn't enough. The ballroom waited. No one seemed willing to breathe until she answered. Emma slowly opened her mouth, but before a single word could leave her lips, Daniel reached forward and wrapped his hand around her wrist. Daniel's fingers closed around Emma's wrist. The movement wasn't violent. It didn't have to be. After everything that had happened, even that small act felt like someone trying to pull her backward into a life she had only just begun to escape. Emma stiffened instinctively, She didn't pull away. Years of trying to avoid conflict had trained her to freeze before she reacted. "Emma," Daniel said, lowering his voice so it sounded almost intimate. "Please, just listen to me." Around them, conversations died completely. The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that the soft music from the string quartet suddenly felt impossibly loud. Emma looked down at his hand. For the first time in years, she noticed something she had always ignored. He wasn't holding her because she looked frightened. He was holding her because he was afraid she would walk away. Before she could speak, another hand entered her field of vision. Long fingers, steady, unhurried. Luca. He didn't shove Daniel. He didn't grab him. He simply wrapped 2 fingers around Daniel's wrist with calm precision. "Let go." His voice was quiet, almost conversational. Daniel frowned. "You don't understand. This is between me and Emma." Luca's expression never changed. "I understand perfectly." His grip tightened only enough for Daniel to feel it. Nothing more, nothing less. Daniel's confidence cracked. Slowly, almost reluctantly, his fingers released Emma. She immediately stepped back, without realizing she had done so. The distance between herself and Daniel felt larger than a few feet. It felt like years. Luca positioned himself naturally beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her, leaving her visible, leaving her free, but making it unmistakably clear that no one would touch her again without going through him first. Daniel forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous." He looked around the ballroom, hoping someone would agree. Nobody did. Several guests quietly turned away from him. Others watched Luca with respectful caution. The event's security staff exchanged glances but remained where they were. They had already recognized the situation, no longer required their judgment. Daniel swallowed. "You've known her for what? A few weeks?" He looked directly at Luca. "You have no idea what we've been through together." Luca answered without hesitation. "I know enough. You don't. We were engaged. I know. We built a future. You destroyed it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You think she's perfect?" Luca remained silent. Daniel laughed bitterly. "You don't know how difficult she can be." Emma felt those words like an old wound reopening. For years, every disagreement had somehow become evidence that she wasn't enough, too emotional, too sensitive, too insecure, too much. She waited for the familiar feeling of shame. It didn't come, because someone else spoke first. "The only difficult thing I see," Luca said calmly, "is a man who mistakes kindness for weakness." Daniel stared. "I made one mistake." "No." Luca's voice remained level. "You made thousands." The ballroom stayed utterly still. "You criticized her confidence. You questioned her worth. You convinced her she had to earn love." Every sentence landed with unbearable precision. And then, Luca looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "You humiliated her before everyone who mattered to her." Daniel's face reddened. "I already apologized." "No. You performed regret." A few guests lowered their eyes. They had thought exactly the same thing. Daniel looked toward Emma desperately. "Tell him." She said nothing. Emma. Still nothing. For the first time since they'd met 5 years ago, she wasn't trying to rescue him from the consequences of his own actions. That frightened him more than Luca ever could. Daniel took one step forward again. "I'm trying to fix this." Luca didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone stopped Daniel in place. Then, after several long seconds, Luca finally spoke the words that no one in the ballroom would ever forget. "The last time you humiliated her, I stayed silent, because she wasn't mine." His voice never rose. There was no threat, no anger, only certainty. He continued, "You won't get a second chance. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Even the musicians had lowered their instruments. Emma looked up at him in surprise, not because he had claimed ownership. She knew he hadn't. She understood what he truly meant. The last time, he had respected the boundaries of another man's relationship. Today, there were no such boundaries left. Daniel looked around desperately. Surely someone would intervene. Someone would remind Luca that this was excessive. Instead, two members of the hotel's security team approached quietly. One stopped beside Daniel. "Mr. Pierce," his tone remained respectful. "We'll escort you out." Daniel stared. "You can't be serious." The security guard didn't argue. He simply waited. Daniel looked toward several influential businessmen he had spent years trying to impress. None met his eyes. He turned toward Emma one final time. "You'll regret this." The words escaped before he could stop them. Emma looked at him steadily. For the first time, she saw no future in his face. Only fear. Not fear of losing her. Fear of losing what being connected to her now represented. She realized something that settled deep inside her heart. If Luca had never appeared at the wedding, Daniel would never have come back. The realization hurt, but it also set her free. Without another word, Daniel allowed security to guide him toward the ballroom doors. The heavy doors closed softly behind him. No applause followed, no celebration, only a collective exhale. The evening slowly resumed. Conversations returned in cautious whispers. The musicians began playing again. Yet Emma barely noticed any of it. She was still staring at Luca. "You knew," she said quietly. He looked at her. "You knew he wasn't apologizing because he loved me." "Yes." "You knew before I did. I hoped you would see it yourself." She searched his face. "Have you really been protecting me? Since before the wedding?" For the first time that evening. Luca didn't answer immediately. Then he admitted the truth. "I started the day I realized you always protected everyone else." His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "I thought someone should finally protect you." Emma felt tears gathering once more. These tears were different, not born from humiliation, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being safe. The banquet ended quietly. No one mentioned Daniel again. The charity auction had raised a record amount for children's hospitals, yet the conversations drifting through the ballroom centered on something entirely different. Not the public confrontation, not Luca's influence, but the quiet way he had stood beside Emma without ever speaking over her. By the time the last guests departed, the grand ballroom had become almost peaceful. Staff members began clearing crystal glasses and folding linen napkins. Emma instinctively reached for a stack of place cards. "I should help." Before she could lift them, a young waiter hurried over. "Miss Collins, please." He smiled warmly. "You've done enough tonight." Another employee nodded in agreement. "We've got it." Emma blinked in surprise. "You don't have to stay late because of me. We're staying because you always stayed for us." She looked from one familiar face to another. These were people she had worked beside for years. Servers, florists, lighting technicians, cleaners. Most guests never remembered their names. Emma always had. As she thanked them softly, Luca watched from across the room. He wasn't watching because she looked elegant beneath the ballroom lights. He was watching because even after everything she had endured, she still noticed everyone except herself. Outside, the evening air carried the cool breeze of early autumn. Chicago shimmered with thousands of lights reflected across the river. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence had become familiar now, comfortable. Emma leaned lightly against the stone railing overlooking the water. "I've been thinking." Luca waited. "I almost accepted Daniel's apology." He looked toward her. "I know." I don't even know why. She wrapped both hands around the warm cup of coffee someone had quietly placed beside her before they left. I knew he didn't mean it. She laughed softly. And part of me still wanted to believe him. Luca remained silent, not because he lacked answers, because he knew she wasn't finished. When someone spends years convincing you that you're lucky they stayed, you eventually become afraid no one else ever will. The words disappeared into the night. Emma watched the lights dancing across the water. I used to think confidence came first. She smiled sadly. Now I think maybe people borrow confidence from the way they're treated. She looked at him. And you've been treating me like I matter. You do. You say it so easily. Because it's true. She lowered her gaze. You make it sound obvious. It is. Emma shook her head. No. You don't understand. She drew a slow breath. I've spent years trying to become someone people would choose. She laughed once, quietly. I changed hairstyles. I changed clothes. I counted calories. I apologized for taking up space. Another pause. I kept believing. If I fixed one more thing, I'd finally deserve love. The words came more easily now, not because they hurt less, because she was finally saying them aloud. Then she looked directly at Luca. I don't understand you. His eyebrows lifted slightly. What don't you understand? She searched his face with complete honesty. Why would someone like you choose someone like me? There it was. The question she had carried silently since the wedding. Not asked with self-pity. Asked because she genuinely couldn't imagine the answer. For a long moment, Luca simply looked at her. Then the faintest smile appeared. The most beautiful woman at your wedding. His voice was almost gentle enough to disappear into the wind. Was never the bride everyone stared at. Emma blinked. He continued. It was the woman who thanked every waiter, while her own heart was breaking. Her breath caught. It was the woman who worried that other people had to clean up after her ruined ceremony. Emma remembered. She had apologized to the church coordinator before leaving. She had thanked the musicians. She had even asked someone to tell the florist the flowers were beautiful, not because she had planned to, because kindness had always been instinct. Luca stepped a little closer. No one noticed. I did. His eyes never left hers. The first time I saw you, you stayed an extra hour helping volunteers pack food boxes after a gala. You weren't being photographed. No reporters were left. There was no audience. You simply believed people deserved help. Emma felt tears beginning to gather again. I wasn't doing anything extraordinary. You never think you are. He smiled softly. That's one of the reasons. She laughed through her tears. There are reasons. There are many. He counted them without looking away. You listen before you answer. You remember birthdays. You know every employee's name. You make frightened people feel welcome. You celebrate other people's happiness, even when your own heart is hurting. Every sentence stripped away another layer of doubt she had spent years building. You've spent so long believing beauty is something people see. He paused. I've been watching the kind people remember. Emma covered her mouth as tears finally escaped. Not violent sobs. Not the broken crying from the church. These tears arrived quietly, like walls collapsing one brick at a time. Luca reached into his pocket. Emma instinctively wondered if he was about to present a ring. He didn't. Instead, he unfolded a small piece of cream-colored cardstock. She recognized it immediately. One of the place cards from the charity gala nearly a year earlier. Her own handwriting covered the back. Please make sure the kitchen staff eat before cleanup begins. She stared in disbelief. You kept that? I did. For almost a year. Yes. Why? Because it reminded me that genuinely kind people still exist. She could no longer stop crying. No one had ever treasured something so ordinary about her. Luca folded the card carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. Then he spoke the words he had carried for months. "I never wanted to rescue you." Emma looked up. "I wanted to know you. I never wanted you to become someone different. I only hoped one day you would see yourself the way everyone whose life you've touched already does." His voice grew even softer. "So I'll ask only once." He offered his hand, not insistently. Simply, openly, will you let someone choose you, without asking you to become someone else first? Emma stared at him through blurred eyes. 5 years with Daniel had taught her that love always came with conditions. Lose weight, dress differently, laugh more quietly, apologize sooner, be less. Luca had never asked her to change a single thing. He had simply waited, patiently, respectfully, believing she would someday believe in herself. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his, not because all her insecurities had disappeared, but because, for the first time, she believed healing was possible. And for the first time in many years, the tears falling down her face carried something stronger than heartbreak. They carried relief. 11 months later, the morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of St. Catherine's Chapel, filling the sanctuary with a warm golden glow. Fresh white roses lined the aisle. Soft ivory ribbons fluttered gently beneath the air conditioning. The fragrance of fresh flowers, mixed with quiet laughter, drifting through the pews. It was another wedding, yet this one felt entirely different. Emma Collins stood in the bridal suite before a full-length mirror. She wore an elegant gown of satin and lace, not because someone else had approved it, because she had fallen in love with it the moment she tried it on. She smiled at her reflection, not searching for flaws, not wondering if she looked smaller, not asking whether she deserved to wear white. She simply smiled. A gentle knock came at the door. Luca Moretti stepped inside, carrying a small velvet box. "My beautiful girl." Emma turned. "You'll make me cry before the ceremony." Luca laughed softly. "Those tears are allowed today." She fastened a delicate pair of pearl earrings onto Emma's ears before stepping back to admire her. "I hoped I'd see this smile one day." Emma embraced her tightly. "Thank you." "What for?" "For believing I belonged in this family, before I believed it myself." Luca kissed her forehead. "My son chose you. I simply thanked heaven he finally stopped pretending he wasn't in love." Emma laughed. So he was that obvious. Only to his mother. Outside the chapel, guests began taking their seats. Many of them remembered another wedding nearly a year earlier. They remembered whispered gossip, humiliation, a woman abandoned at the altar. Today, they saw someone entirely different. Emma greeted every florist, thanked every musician, stopped to hug the elderly church caretaker who had polished the pews before sunrise. Nothing about her kindness had changed. Only her confidence had. At the end of the aisle stood Luca Moretti. His charcoal tuxedo fit with effortless elegance. Yet his attention wasn't on the decorations, or the guests, or the photographers. It remained fixed on the chapel doors. One of his oldest friends approached with a grin. "So," Luca glanced sideways, "you still have time. For what? Changing your mind." Several nearby guests laughed quietly. Luca smiled. The calm, unmistakable smile of a man who had never been more certain of anything. "I made my decision," the day another man walked away. His friend raised an eyebrow. "And everything after that?" Luca looked toward the closed bridal doors. Everything after that was simply waiting until she believed she deserved to be chosen. The chapel grew still. The music began. Every guest stood. The doors slowly opened. Emma appeared at the end of the aisle. For a heartbeat, The entire room seemed to disappear. Luca saw only her. Not because she was wearing a wedding gown, not because every eye had turned toward her, but because she was walking with her head held high. No hesitation, no apology, no fear of taking up space. When she reached him, she smiled, the same warm smile she had once offered strangers at charity events. Only now, it was entirely his. The officiant welcomed everyone before beginning the ceremony. There were vows, there was laughter, there were tears, not tears of humiliation, tears of gratitude. When it was time to exchange rings, Emma looked into Luca's eyes. "I spent years believing love had to be earned." Her voice trembled gently. "You taught me that real love begins by being accepted." She slipped the ring onto his finger. "Thank you for seeing me before I could see myself." Luca held her hand carefully. "As long as I live, I will never ask you to become anyone except the woman who already changed my life." The chapel fell silent. No grand promises, no dramatic speeches, just truth. The officiant smiled warmly. "By the authority entrusted to me, it is my honor to pronounce you husband and wife." Luca leaned forward, not hurriedly, not for the photographers, simply because there was nowhere else in the world he wanted to be. Their kiss was gentle, unhurried, certain. The applause that followed filled every corner of the chapel. As they walked back down the aisle together, Emma instinctively paused beside the musicians. "Thank you." She thanked the photographer, the church staff, the wedding coordinator, even the young server carrying trays of champagne. Luca watched with quiet affection. She had never changed. She had only finally realized she never needed to. Outside the chapel, beneath a sky as clear as new beginnings, Emma slipped her hand into Luca's. This time, he held it without hesitation. And this time, neither of them ever let go.